Hey folks, you're listening to the Idea Roastery. I'm Herman.
And I'm Jason.
Jason, I'm sure you've heard about all the data center construction that is happening globally, predominantly in the United States and China, but everywhere else as well. I think we even have another data center going up in Johannesburg. And the question I think is being posed a lot, and I'm sure you've seen the headlines, is
Mm.
are we in a bubble?
It's a big question. I'm not an economist or a financial analyst, but I've looked at it compared to like the dot-com bubble, which was the only other kind of bubble that I know, early 1990s.
Tech mediated bubble.
Yeah, exactly. The tech bubble. I think it is a lot of a financial question. I think because people have been looking at the S&P and it's pretty much dominated by like the main six or seven
The
players,
Magnificent Seven.
the Magnificent Seven, and the main one in this conversation is Nvidia. And I think a lot of people are kind of speculating as to whether Nvidia will go down. And so when people say, "Are we in a bubble?" Is it like it's kind of like I feel like it's a question of is Nvidia too overpriced? So I'm not going to speculate more on that. I think it's more a hype cycle where I think there is a little bit of a difference in that the hype cycle is more like a popularity of a particular sort of concept. And it's hard to argue that AI is not quite a big paradigm shift in the way that technology is being both adopted and implemented. And I think it's kind of maybe got some similarities to .com. And it's very hard for me to say whether it is a bubble. I think I tend to go on the side that it's not, although there is a lot of hype from these big companies, because when ChatGPT dropped and kind of the following years after that, there's kind of been this like race between these big players to try and like basically capture as many of those customers that are now building into this cycle. And through doing so, they need to show that they are the best and that they've got all these next breaking technologies. And I think what's happened now, people becoming a little bit more savvy about what's actually going on and actually starting to be a little bit more realistic, which is not different to than like a normal hype cycle. So I wouldn't say it's like a financially sort of propped up thing. Our perception of it is that there's a lot of sort of hype in the system and it will just kind of wash out.
Mm. I think that there's that bubbles can only really be spotted in hindsight, right? So if we take a look at the dot-com bubble, you just saw so much money flowing into what are essentially websites, informational websites, your pets.com being the poster child of that era. And in hindsight, all of these companies were incredibly overvalued and the entire thing was overblown. And then when the cheap money ran out, a whole bunch of the vast majority of these companies died, and only sort of the Googles and the Yahoos, although that's still to be determined, were the ones that survived and actually became valuable companies. But then you have, let's say, for instance, social media, right? Like when Facebook and well, Meta and their suite of products and Twitter, et cetera, were gaining popularity in like the early 20 teens, we could have speculated that we were in a social media bubble, but in hindsight, that wasn't true. They ended up coming to dominate the world and popular culture and became these incredibly, incredibly valuable companies. So it really depends on the outcome, right? So if we take a look at what's happening right now, there's a whole bunch of money being funneled into the AI race, to see who can train the best and most intelligent model. All these companies are trying to crack artificial general intelligence or artificial superintelligence or whatever you want to call it. And we can only really say in hindsight whether this was a bubble or not, because if they manage to crack artificial general intelligence and it fundamentally revolutionizes how knowledge work is done and restructures our society, not a bubble. However, if we just get a, slightly smarter ChatGPT year over year, and it doesn't necessarily have a very big return on investment for the people who invested in, or the companies and corporations that invested in the data center construction, et cetera, construction and everything, is, yeah, then it was a bubble and people are going to lose a bunch of money. I mean, the infrastructure is still going to stick around, and I'm sure that some companies will come out the other side um, good in the same way that Google came out of the dot-com bubble good. So it really, I guess the answer is that it really depends on how this all goes.
It's also that when ChatGPT came out, there was almost like no one knew much about this technology, and I think from the outside it looked like it was like quite a radical jump, and for a lot of people it was like everyone talks about their like ChatGPT moment, and it feels like it was like a non-continuous like step up in like technology. But I think what's happened is that maybe the bubble or the spike has happened between then and like a few years later where we didn't really know a lot about how this technology would progress. I think a lot of people were thinking like, oh, like now that I can chat to my computer, all of a sudden it's going to be like this super intelligent thing that's going to help me in my day to day. And I think what's happened is that over time, more papers have come out. People have been like even questioning whether like AGI can actually be achieved. What, where do these systems fit into like our normal day-to-day life? Are they going to replace people, or are they going to do like small projects, or like where are they going to fit in? And I think now that we've got more like a baseline of what the capabilities are, we're kind of a little bit more like, okay, yeah, like AGI is probably not like going to happen as soon as we think, and it might take a lot longer. And so it gives people a little bit of almost breathing room to kind of think about like how do I actually start applying it. And I also feel that there's a bit of like crossing the chasm. There's this burst of early adopters who like take on these new technologies and they play around with them, and the companies that get formed in that era, there are like lots of them that go bust, and there are lots of them that kind of don't quite make it. But you do get this like nugget of people that actually come out of it good. But the crossing the chasm is almost like how do you get those like early adopters to now move into like the sort of what they call laggards of like the people who are actually like building systems? How do you actually get them implemented? And there's a lot of articles that I've read about like how enterprises are really struggling to adopt AI, and that's kind of like a bit of a sign to me that it's maybe not going to be this all-encompassing revolutionary thing in like a short term, and it's maybe pushed it out to maybe like 10 like 5-10 years from now.
Yeah, so I've been seeing a lot of talk online about how hiring has dramatically slowed down in Europe and the United States, and I can't necessarily say if it's reached down here to South Africa, but the thesis that is being posited everywhere is that people think that, oh, companies have realized that ChatGPT can just do a bunch of the work, or they think that ChatGPT can just do a bunch of the work. Now, I actually disagree with this thesis, is that what we've seen historically is that when a tool comes along that can make an employee more efficient, companies tend to just become a lot more productive, right? Like the average, if the productivity of the worker goes up, the productivity of the company goes up, and the company will just leverage that to make more money. They wouldn't necessarily use that to downsize their workforce. Instead, what we've kind of seen historically is that when money is cheap, so when interest rates are low, companies hire more people. And then as interest rates go up and the money becomes more expensive, hiring slows down and firing increases. And so I would say that the recent spate of it becoming more difficult to find a job in the tech sector, but across knowledge work in general, is actually a result of that. I think it's a result of interest rates and money becoming more expensive, and not necessarily due to the fact that we have artificial intelligence. And if you take a look at the sectors of the economy that are actually doing really well, there's actually a lot of hiring going on over there, especially when it comes to data center construction. I mean, like HVAC professionals, they are doing so well in because instead of just doing like home air conditioning installations, they're now doing cooling systems for data centers, and you're seeing a bunch of new employment happening inside of the energy sector because all these companies are like, we need more energy to power the all of our NVIDIA chips sitting in this warehouse.
It feels like there is like a tangible, I guess this like idea of AGI and the value that it could possibly create to any company that kind of cracks it is what's driving, as you said, the investment that goes into that. And so companies are willing to invest a lot of money because the value is just so incredible if you have like this really smart system that can do all of these tasks and take on this work. And that I do think is trickling down into the energy sector. It's trickling down into actually construction. And I haven't really felt a time where we've had this like swelling up of people actually wanting to like build like things. Like it kind of feels like if we were ever in the railroad boom where it was like, yeah, we're gonna build like all these railroads and like people are just putting them up all over the place and like some people are like creating their own small like data centers or like they're creating their home PCs and everyone's trying to like get involved there. And I do think it is a good thing because it kind of feels like there is a bit of a direction of like progress where people are actually progressing. Where is before I felt like there was a lot of, I don't know, we've spoken about it before. It's like not people not really doing much.
It's kind of that rise of useless jobs. I mean, there's that book that made the rounds. I think it was 2022, 2023. That was called Bullshit Jobs or something like that, and it pretty much was just talking about how so many people feel like their company doesn't, their job has no purpose, and especially like the layers of middle management. And I think that was the result of money being incredibly cheap, because COVID really like made money super, super cheap in the developed world. And so essentially, what happened is it just led to this huge hiring boom where all these companies went and overhired while money was cheap. And then, as we saw with all the big tech layoffs that happened, is these tech layoffs, in my personal opinion, didn't happen because of increased worker productivity and AI. They happened because money suddenly became hard to come by. And so there were all these cost-cutting measures that were put into place.
Yeah, I think the growth like basically slowed down, and that's quite common. I think yeah, I agree with you that there was like a bit of a missed story where some there's layoffs, people like automatically assume it's because of AI. And if anything, I've seen more use cases in my like day-to-day conversations with people where there's like a resistance to even like be connected to AI. And I think we also have to delineate between like people like us who are closer to the coal face of AI versus the rest of the world, which I'd say is a larger majority, who don't really even know how to use ChatGPT or have used it
No,
once.
actually, an example of what you're describing, it was just one of those like, oh, moments that I had, and it happened this past week. I think it was the new Gemini or the new Claude model or something like that that came out, and I was reading the release notes, and it got to a section where it was talking about how personable and how warm and fuzzy it was, and how people who used it were like, I like this personality more than I like the other personality. And, there's now like a personality benchmark, like which one is the nicest one to speak to. And I was like, this is completely useless. All I want is I want it to do its job and I want it to do it well. I don't want it to be sycophantic. I don't want it to, use colloquialisms and make me feel at home. I just, I have set it a job and I want it to complete that job with as few errors as possible, preferably pretty quickly. And then I thought about it and I'm like, actually, I am very much using it in a particular way. I, I was using it for financial modeling and research. Um, and instead, if you take a look at like the ChatGPT subreddit, you'll notice that people are actually just chatting to it. right? It's people's therapists, it's their lover, it's their god, it's their homie, it's all of these other things. And so this is really just like a my perception thing. I thought it was just like a, it's a computer that you can essentially speak to, and hopefully it'll give you the right information. But I don't trust the information. And I'd say the broader user base, I think there's a lot of is anthropomorphism the right word? Uh, like they kind of
Yeah,
see it
as a
as an
person.
intelligent thing. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it passes the Turing test, right? So people like on average probably do see it as like as if it is a human. And I guess that maybe is part of why I'm bullish that it's not a bubble, is that there are so many use cases that are like coming out of the technology that there's like opportunity for companies to take on those use cases. I mean, like if you think of companies like Calm and Headspace, there's no reason why they can't have like therapy agents and stuff like that integrated. And maybe it is like maybe we are like as tech people expect a lot more. And I think there is value for that, but maybe for the large majority who aren't maybe even technical or don't even go on their computer that much, it's going to be a different kind of technology for them in how they experience it.
Yeah, I think that there's actually a big parallel over here to the, remember it was called, I think, the sharing economy, but it really was just talking about like gig work. So Uber, DoorDash, these kinds of things, Airbnb. And I remember back in 2015, 2016, there was also this whole thing where it was posited that this was a bubble, and that they would go to show that like Uber has not made any money, and it is in fact losing, 40 million or $400 million a year. And so everyone was predicting the imminent collapse of this industry. And that collapse didn't really come, and it didn't come for a couple of reasons. Is that just like more and more money flowed into it until it became stable? I don't know if Uber's ever been profitable, but it's kind
They
of
have. I think they are profitable now.
okay.
Yeah.
It just took what, 12 years. Um,
Yeah.
and the fact of the matter is that like Uber is such a fundamentally it's fundamentally here, right? It's like it's a part of so many people's lives, and it's used every day by probably tens of millions of people all over the world. Um, and I kind of see that happen with these chat apps really quickly as well. Is like from one year to the next, no one was using them to pretty much everyone was using them. And especially now that like all of these models are free within certain limits, it's like used by people all over the world, regardless of their purchasing power. And so I think that like these aren't going anywhere. And yes, we are going to see some companies like invest too much in the wrong direction and go bankrupt, right? But like the paradigm is here to stay.
And what do you think about the idea of administrative workers who are pushing back on using AI in their day-to-day life? Because I think I read an article, I think it was along the lines of like, yeah, like before you start implementing AI, you almost have to like get a lot of buy-in from employees because a lot of employees, they've seen the news. And I think the news is also driven by like a pessimism, which is I think like an intellectually easy thing to do is to be pessimistic. But I think there are employees who have read those sort of big headlines like AI is replacing jobs, like Amazon's cutting jobs because of like robotics. And so they're super nervous to even like have anything to do with ChatGPT. So there's almost like a pushback within not like the obviously the high performing companies like Mag 7 and those kind of companies are like you kind of forced to use it and like tough luck. But like in companies where you have employees where you it's not as easy to just like hire someone like new, there's like a resistance. And what do you say to either the company owners or like the people who are resisting the use of AI?
I feel like so much good humanity work is being lost. for example, artists who would make an illustration for a gym or a blog post or something like that for, 20 to $100. Like that market's gone completely. I was in I was in a postnet recently, and there were all the Christmas cards. The Christmas postcards were out, and every single one of them was AI generated, and it made me really sad. It's like I saw it put really well, is that I don't know if I ever really believed in a human soul until I saw art created without one. Um, and so the same can be said with writers. I'm currently reading On Writing, which is a memoir of the craft by Stephen King. And it's this process of becoming a writer is such a beautiful thing. I mean, in his case, it was also very harrowing, but I digress. And I feel like something is lost over there. The same goes with programming. I've spent a good part of my life honing this craft that is, I think it might actually be at the place where AI is probably better than me at programming more broadly. I'm just better at working in my own code base than AI. Um, and so, like I do completely understand why people are feeling opposed to it. However, I don't think that that is going to stop it because we're in a market-based economy, right? And so if one company takes a moral standpoint to say, we won't use these tools, and another company that does exactly the same thing but are using those tools, and let's assume that they're just a lot more efficient, their prices are lower, their turnaround is faster, is that customers customers rarely have the same like have strong moral standpoints, right? The economics of it is that they follow cheapness. They follow the lowest price. And
So you're saying it's either like you lose your job now, or you wait till your company goes bankrupt and you lose your job in the future.
I think that that's a very brutal way to put it. But it is kind of the truth. I mean, I think a good example of this is the U.S. dock worker strikes that happened. Was that this year or last year? Where
Oof,
the
I can't say. I think it might
So
have
they
been,
were
yeah.
essentially striking to make sure that their work doesn't get automated. Now, the interesting thing is that on the other coast and at ports around modern ports around the world, it's all automated, right? Is they're just kind of like this last human-based bastion where they're like, we don't want machines to do our work, we're going to do the work. And that's like all's well and good for them. And I think that they could do that because they had that collective bargaining power of the unions, and also because it's hard to just quickly go and set up another dock that can compete with that dock, because there isn't really the space nor the capital to create such a big infrastructural project. But in most other parts of the economy, you don't have that moat, right? Is that like the if you're a marketing agency, another marketing agency that, is let's assume that they're AI empowered and they can do everything that you do but better, and cheaper, then that's just that's just going to outcompete you.
I think there is a difference between knowledge workers and then the dock workers who have like that's kind of their profession and all they know. Because I feel like the physical realm is a lot harder to learn potentially than knowledge work, and knowledge work, one of the like defining characteristics of it is it's quite flexible. Like when you go to work, you're like a knowledge worker. You kind of have a job, but it's not like maybe you like typing where you've got like outputs specifically. It's kind of like you got to build this business or you got to grow this thing or do marketing. And there's all these like subcomponents of it. And I feel like within knowledge work, there's still a bit of flexibility. So even though you have AI that's assisting you or like that's part of it, I don't think there's going to be a removal of knowledge work because that can shift. But with robotics and like a fulfillment center worker, it's like, yeah, like that thing's going to completely remove you. And if you don't have, and we've always like had conversations in the general zeitgeist about like whether someone who's like a plumber can learn how to like code or become a knowledge worker. I don't know if it's that transferable from one knowledge work to another knowledge work or from knowledge work to like physical like labor kind of work. And so I think there is a difference there. It's also interesting because it would be kind of weird that like everyone's so anti the way that Amazon treats their staff. But if they introduce robotics, they will be angry that they're losing their jobs.
And they will also be angry if Amazon raises its prices.
It is some of these places are like nasty places to work, and that shift is what people are worried about. Is like how long is it going to take to reskill? And I think if data centers become like a bigger commodity, which I guess people are kind of hoping for, then there will be like place you can maybe like retrain as a electrician or HVAC person. But then there also needs to be support for that training, right? Like to get people to be able to transition easily.
Well, I mean, it's already the case in the United States specifically that it makes more sense to train in a craft than it does to actually go to university. And I think that's mostly just because the price of university has spiraled so far out of control. Interestingly enough, I saw something pointed out the other day that all the things that make the United States unaffordable and where their economy is fundamentally broken. And that would be really healthcare, housing, and tuition. Is all of those came to be so expensive because of easily accessible, cheap money. So, an 18-year-old can go and take on $200,000 worth of debt to study a fine arts degree. And banks are like super keen to hand out these loans because there isn't like a fixed loan term and they follow you through bankruptcies and everything. And so, what's a better market than a 18-year-old who doesn't know better to take on $200,000 worth of debt. It's crazy, but it's also because there is access to this money, universities can charge more and more. There's talk about having 50-year mortgage terms in the United States, and the theory is that this will actually make homes more expensive because people have more access to capital because they've got a longer period to pay it off. And so it really comes down to how much money people have to spend, which kind of loops back to the whole hiring thing. Is like when money is cheap, prices go up. When money is expensive, prices should go down. I think in some cases we're still waiting to see that though.
Yeah. Even from the very early days, I've always been quite optimistic about it because I did attend like a hack day a couple of months ago. And I was really surprised because there were a couple of people who were non-technical who were there. And they were able to like vibe code apps and like the glow that came from people who had an idea for an app. And a lot of people do have an idea for an app somewhere. And they were able to like code it up and get something that kind of basically worked using like these like lovables and bolts and all of these tools. I think that was almost like if you show someone how to do that, they'll probably be okay with using ChatGPT in their work. Because I think the other side is that although there'll be layoffs, I think the cost of actually starting your own business will become less and it'll become easier and you'll have an AI and assistant that can kind of guide you through that. And that's also why I'm bullish on like indie hacking space is that I think that more people will rely on indie hacking kind of style small businesses that have like a thing that kind of provides value. And I think that people who are worried about AI replacing them should try out some of these tools and see if they can at least try and build something of their own. Because I think the AI will become easier. It will make it easier for having smaller, like tighter knit companies and not have these like really large companies with thousands and thousands of people. And that's what I'm quite optimistic about.
Yeah, I hear you. And I'm speculating that you are right. And I guess we'll find out in the next couple of years.
Yeah, exactly.